Bug-Eyed Tales takes you back to the jungles of Sri Lanka, once known as Ceylon, where in 1906, a clergyman finds himself in a death-defying predicament. Perched in a tree, with a ferocious tiger climbing up after him and a hungry python poised to strike, he's trapped in the pitch black, where every move could be his last. Find out if he survives this terrifying night in Standoff. Man versus Python versus Tiger. By the Reverend E.L.C. Wilson, late Church of England missionary in Ceylon.
I intend in the following pages to give an account of something that happened to me in Ceylon. It is 20 years ago now, but if it were twice that time, I am quite certain I should never forget it. How would you like to find yourself a prisoner in a tree, with a monstrous python on a branch just above you, making ready to seize you in his death-dealing coils, and a hungry tiger down below in the act of climbing up after you? I was caught between Scylla and Charybdis with a vengeance, akin to the Greek mythological choice between facing a monstrous sea creature or a deadly whirlpool, where each option poses its own lethal threat. The wholesome advice, in medio tutissimus ibis, or Latin for "you will go safest in the middle," did not hold good in my case, for my foes were not stationary, but evidently closing in upon me. I went to Ceylon in 1885 and was engaged in mission work not far from Colombo. One day I joined a couple of friends, Messrs. Mark Garrett and Percy Young, who were going out hunting in the jungle. The morning passed by without any striking adventure worth recording, but at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I noticed a beautiful peacock 40 or 50 yards in front of me. I raised my rifle and fired, the result being that it fell to the ground, slightly wounded, but when I tried to catch it, it made its escape and was soon out of sight in the thick grass and bushes. I hurried in pursuit, heedless of my companion's injunctions not to proceed too far, and, as the bird was unable to fly, I hoped to be able to run it down or give it the coup de grace with a second shot from my rifle. I soon discovered, however, that walking through a forest in Ceylon is no joke. There are no paths or roads, and the fallen trees, prickly shrubs, and dense undergrowth make it extremely difficult, and in some places almost impossible, to get along at all, while the thick foliage overhead intercepts the daylight and prevents you from seeing in what direction you are travelling. I didn't catch the peacock, and after a while I sat down to rest myself on a log. Suddenly I heard the growling of a tiger unpleasantly near me. Springing to my feet, I looked round for a few moments, hoping to find some suitable place for shelter. The only idea that occurred to me was to climb up a tree and try to conceal myself, for I did not relish the idea of the beast stalking me and perhaps leaping upon me before I could get a view of it. My climbing scheme, however, was by no means easy of execution, the trees being for the most part tall, smooth and straight, with no boughs or handholds low enough down to catch hold of. As I looked anxiously about me, I heard that awful sound again, apparently still closer, and as it rang in my ears, I noticed for the first time a tree that belonged to a different species, which had branches closer to the ground. There was no time to be lost. I commenced to climb it, but was forced to abandon my rifle in order to make any headway. It was not much good scaling the tree, for I knew that tigers were first-rate climbers, but no other plan at the moment occurred to me, and I hoped, of course, that the brute would pass on without seeing me. The tree I had selected was not a very difficult one to climb, and when I had ascended some 15 or 16 feet, I saw that it branched in 2 directions. Here I stopped for a while, fervently hoping that the tiger would pass by without perceiving me. A few minutes of breathless anxiety ensued. Then I detected a hissing sound just above me. Glancing upwards, I saw to my intense horror a dreadful-looking python, with its body coiled round one of the upper branches and its head and neck swinging like a pendulum. My hurried climb had evidently disturbed it, and as I gazed at the creature, it turned its cold, cruel eyes upon me, hissing occasionally to let me understand that I had fallen into the power of an enemy who would show me no mercy. Trembling with horror, I diverted my gaze as quickly as possible, partly from repugnance, partly from fear that the snake might fascinate me, as I had heard is usually the case with its victims. On looking down, however, with some dim and vague idea of escaping, I beheld my first enemy, the tiger, crouching at the foot of the tree, evidently quite at home and in no hurry to take his departure. It was not full-grown, so far as I could judge in my then state of mind. I don't suppose it was more than 6 or 7 feet in length. At the same time, however, it was quite big enough and savage enough to make me feel very uncomfortable. It was a terrible moment, I can assure you. Death menaced me on either hand, the python above and the tiger below. I felt literally overcome with horror. But even then I remembered the old saying that while there is life, there is hope, and tried to devise some means of escape from my awful predicament. I do not think the tiger had as yet seen me, so the chances were that if I kept perfectly quiet, it would move on and seek for its prey elsewhere. I had no weapon, having, you will remember, been compelled to leave my rifle at the foot of the tree in order to climb it. Presently, matters were brought to a crisis. An unlucky movement caused my hat to catch in a branch of the tree. Off it went, in spite of my desperate efforts to retrieve it, and fell down close by the side of the tiger, causing the animal to rise to its feet with a growl of mingled fury and surprise. After searching all around to find where the hat had come from, it finally looked up and saw me. I saw its greenish eyes widen with rage when it realized I was there. Now indeed, things were at their worst. I remained sitting on the fork of the tree as though spellbound, afraid to move to the right hand or the left on account of the snake, which was still swinging itself relentlessly to and fro just above me. I noticed, with a shudder of dread, that, while my attention was occupied with my other foe, the python had gradually been descending lower and lower, and its hideous head was at the present moment no more than 10 or 12 inches above me. Intense as was my mental anguish at this moment, the situation reminded me forcibly of Poe's story of the pit and the pendulum, where the sharp knife came slowly down from the roof of the dungeon, swinging like a pendulum towards the hapless prisoner. As soon as the tiger saw where I was, it began to climb up after me, snarling fiercely. My only hope now was to crawl along one of the 2 forked branches, drop to the ground, and pick up my rifle. The snake, however, was so close to my head that I fully expected it would dart upon me if I made an attempt to move out of the way. Cold sweat broke out upon my forehead as I looked first at the swaying python and then at the climbing tiger. Just at that moment, a parrot settled on the tree, and the reptile, leaving me out of the question for the time being, raised its head to try to seize it. This diversion gave me the opportunity I wanted. I cautiously crawled along one of the branches and found myself at last between Scylla and Charybdis no longer. Looking down, I tried to calculate the distance from the ground. It was, roughly speaking, about 18 feet, a nasty drop certainly, and one that might sprain my ankle, but I made up my mind to risk it sooner than fall a prey to either of my relentless foes. If I succeeded in reaching terra firma and could snatch up my rifle, the chances were I might shoot the tiger before it came down from the tree, and if luck favored me, I could get a shot at the python as well. While these ideas were flitting through my mind, my 4-footed foe was slowly yet surely ascending, while the snake, having failed to capture the parrot, had resumed its swinging position as before. Up came the tiger, higher and higher, till it reached the spot where I had previously been seated. There, above him, was the python, still swaying its head monotonously backwards and forwards. The tiger never looked upwards, but glanced repeatedly to the right and left, apparently at a loss to discover my whereabouts. Before he could come to a decision as to what direction I had taken, the python suddenly darted down with marvelous rapidity and coiled itself round its neck. Having seized its victim, it proceeded, as usual with the species, to strangle it. The tiger, who was using his claws to hold himself onto the tree, was taken completely at a disadvantage. He struggled desperately for a few moments, then his eyes started from their sockets, his tongue protruded, and blood flowed from his mouth and nostrils. The great claws relaxed their hold, and as I watched, spellbound with horror, I saw the tiger hanging in mid-air quite dead, the python still fastened round its neck. A horrible sight indeed to witness. Presently the snake uncoiled the rest of its body from the branch of the tree, and while doing so gradually lowered its prey to the ground. It was an enormous, repulsive-looking reptile of a brown and yellow color, measuring, I should think, about 30 feet in length and almost as thick as a man's thigh. I shuddered as I watched it, and the thought what my own fate might have been if a merciful providence had not interposed to save me. When the tiger had been lowered from the tree, the snake glided under its body, and coiling itself round and round it, squeezed its victim almost beyond recognition. It was a sickening sight, and the cracking of the tiger's bones, which I heard quite distinctly from where I was seated, was a sound that I shall never forget. Ere long the reptile uncoiled itself again, and its prey, or what was now left of it, seemed literally reduced to a mass of pulp. Then another horrible performance took place. The python started to swallow it, beginning with the head, which soon disappeared from view. During the operation, the skin of the snake's neck became so distended that I thought every minute it was going to burst, while its mouth dripped with the glutinous saliva which enables it to lubricate its prey, rendering the process of deglutition more easy to accomplish. When I saw what was going on, I thought I might safely try to leave my place of refuge. I concluded that the python was far too deeply engaged to pay much attention to my movements. Cautiously descending the tree by the same way that I had mounted it, I secured my rifle, went up close to the reptile, and firing at its head shattered it to pieces. There it lay with the tiger still firmly fixed in its bleeding jaws, forming the most horrible and extraordinary spectacle that I have ever witnessed. I stood for some moments gazing at the two creatures, once so formidable, but now powerless to harm me any longer. At last I was startled by hearing my name shouted, and shortly afterwards my companions appeared upon the scene. They heartily congratulated me after hearing the story of my escape.
"It was a good thing you fired that shot,"
exclaimed one of them.
"or I don't believe we should ever have found you. You've been having some rare sport too from the look of it. Wait a minute, I'll cut off one of the tiger's claws. You can get it mounted."
I may add that I still wear it. It serves to remind me of my terrible experience in the jungle when I found myself between a monstrous python and a hungry tiger. Ultimately, it was nothing short of providence that guided me to a narrow escape from the very jaws of death